Hi, everyone, and welcome to Shellcast, the podcast that's a beach break for your ears. Here on Shellcast, we celebrate the people and experiences that make the Fort Myers islands, beaches, and neighborhoods of Southwest Florida so special. For this episode, I'm joined by Tony Lapi, chairman of the board of the Sanibel Captiva Beach Resorts, past chairman of Visit Florida, and a longtime member of the Lee County Visitor and Convention Bureau's Tourist Development Council. And he's also author of a new book called Tales of an Island Innkeeper.
Shellcast.
And to be crystal clear, the book credits actually say told by Tony Lapi and written by Bill Schreiber. It's a collection of stories filled with colorful characters, iconic island events, and heartfelt reflections on resilience, teamwork, and perseverance. Tony's journey began back in 1976 when he and his partners purchased property and a handful of small structures on Captiva Island. Over the years, he grew the operation from just 47 units and 2 employees to what is now Tween Waters Island Resort. More than 13 acres with 137 cottages, suites, and guest rooms, plus a spa, marina, 3 restaurants, nature trails, and eco adventures. There's so much out there. And I just want to say I enjoyed reading Tony's book, which to me can best be described as a love letter to Captiva Island, Tween Waters, the guests who stayed there, his staff, his friends, and his wonderful wife, Angie. It's also worth noting that the proceeds from the book sales go to benefit Captiva Island Historical Society, a truly worthy community group. So everyone grab your beach chair and settle in. I'm excited to share a conversation with someone who's been at the heart of Captiva's hospitality for nearly 5 decades. Tony Lapi, welcome to Shellcast.
Thanks, Jackie. It's quite a thing you said about me. I feel very honored to be here and look forward to today.
We're very honored to have you here. You're a legend here in Southwest Florida, particularly Lee County, and we appreciate everything that you've done for the growth and for the hospitality and tourism industry here. So let's get started. At the beginning, can you kind of take us back to 1976? You came here all the way from Rochester, New York. What made you decide to take a chance on Captiva Island in Tween Waters?
It goes back to my growing up in Rochester. My next door neighbor, who was 20 years our senior, was Lloyd Wright, and we became very good friends. He knew me when I was basically like 14 years old. And as I grew up, he noticed my work ethic. And he had been involved in some real estate down here on Sanibel in the 60s, basically West Wind Inn. He and a group did that, but he wanted to do his own thing. And so he started with a condo and didn't like that. He wanted to buy and hold. And I had come down and helped him work on the condo. And he said, Tony, would you be interested in maybe doing something with me and the company to do a buy and hold? And I said, well, let's see what's out there. And that's when we came up to Tween Waters, basically in early 76 it was, and looking things over. And of course, back then, things were pretty rough. And basically, Sanibel and Captiva were slightly undiscovered, I would say.
When you first arrived, what was the resort like? I guess it really wasn't quite a resort yet. And what kind of vision did you have for it?
I'll give credit to Lloyd for the vision. You know, I'm kind of like the workhorse guy, and I enjoyed it. But when we first got here, you know, this property had been neglected. Of course, business wasn't very much. So the people who had bought it from Johnny Wakefield and Dottie Wakefield, they had really never any interest in running it. They wanted to knock everything down and build condos. So we were here when I took over. It was in pretty much rough shambles. We had mold before it was popular, and it was just, you know, one of those things, you know. And the first time Lloyd came up here with a realtor to look at it, Lloyd looked around for a little bit and then said, get me out of here. But then he could see the vision, and lucky for us, it was a great investment. It turned out to be such a iconic place with such an ideal location. It was just, it worked out to be really cool.
Tony, it's on just a sliver of land right there. Can you just talk about just the geography of it? Because when you look at it on a map, it's hard to believe that there's so much on just that little sliver.
One of the things that brought us to it, and we liked this property, was the elevation, which is pretty interesting when you think about all the storms and things we've been through. The elevation of that road out front is literally 10 feet above mean high tide. Now, even before we started doing beach renourishment, that was a major protection, because as you go through Captiva and you go down to downtown Captiva and then further out the South Seas, they're giving away almost 6 feet of elevation to us. So in terms of storm protection, people don't realize it's a sliver, yeah, but we're elevated all along here, which is a huge benefit, as you've seen over the years.
When you're facing the Gulf and then the water behind you is the Back Bay or Pine Island Sound, or I know Buck Key is back there. What is it technically called, Tony?
That's Roosevelt Channel. Comes across, between us and Buck Key and runs all the way down to Blind Pass. That channel you can take in a kayak. You can go in a motorboat too, but you got to go slow, and it's marked very well. But that's Roosevelt Channel. Farther out is Pine Island Sound, which is the bigger body of water.
So in your book, Tales of an Island Innkeeper, you also write about resilience and teamwork. And can you talk about a time when your staff really pulled together and made a difference? I know there are so many in the book, but just if you could pull one out for us.
There's a couple things I would say. There's resilience and pulling it together over some type of thing that happens. And then there's the events that we all pull together to pull off. And I would look back and say, of course, the first major one for us was probably Hurricane Charlie, because nobody had ever been through a hurricane. And we all pulled together, and we were 17 days out here on Captiva without power, but we all pulled together. Yeah, we had the pool opened up after about 3 days, and we cleaned it up. We put the furniture out there, and I remember people who were flying around, looking around. All the pools were black, and ours was really looked like we were open. People said, "How'd you do that?" And so we lived together. It was kind of like Swiss Family Robinson, but it really worked good. And then when I look at teamwork, when I think of the things we pulled off back in the early 80s, when we put on an Oktoberfest and we brought in a band that opened the German Pavilion at Epcot Center to open up our Oktoberfest. We had it 3 or 4 years before Cape Coral thought about it. And, in those days, for October being as slow as it was, for us to be able on a Saturday night to pull 1,000 people out here and have no incidents, but just having a great time, the staff really pulled together to do that. So I think those types of things and what we do every year now, the tree lighting ceremony, those are really huge things.
Tony, do you know the term FOMO, fear of missing out? Well, reading your book, when I was done, I really had this, not fear of missing out, but I really regretted that I wasn't able to experience so many of those things, because it just sounded like you guys had so much fun.
We did, and things, you have to remember, things do run a course. And we had Oktoberfest, and then with other events coming on, and then the Cape Coral one, and it was so much. And we did it, remember, we did it to help bring in business. And then after doing it for almost 18 years, business had developed, and it wasn't that we didn't want to do it, but we were too busy with other stuff, which was a good thing. So it worked. If you think about it, it's like what the VCB has done with Island Hopper. They brought that event in September because September is our deadest month. And golly, it's been working very well.
So I know your wife plays a big role in your story. And how did Angie's support and partnership shape this journey for you?
First word that comes to mind is patience. Putting up with my insane hours. I was certainly a workaholic. And really at that point in time, building the business probably up through the mid to late 80s, work-life balance wasn't a word I knew. That was my biggest thing. I would leave in the dark in the morning, and I wouldn't come home until the dark. And that makes it tough on a marriage. In a sense, we didn't have kids, so that was one thing. But that, and then the way she helped me through some of the needs that we had to have here, whether it was making uniforms for Oktoberfest or helping me with an Italian buffet or something like that. I mean, she was incredible.
The story, and we'll leave this for the book. Your story of how you met is just it's wonderful. It couldn't be more romantic. Are they going to get together? Are they not? So, could you read a short excerpt from Tales of the Island Innkeeper for us?
So, and I'll just phrase it ahead of time what happened. And that was where I was very young, and this was probably in the 70s. We just opened the restaurant. And I really, sometimes I would explode, you might say, or whatever, but I shot off and I used a lot of verbal stuff that I don't use anymore, language and bad. So I'll read you in the book, to me, which was a really learning curve. It might take me a few minutes, but I think it's important to understand how people grow and learn. So this was after I had shot my mouth up and I found out that the young waitress wasn't coming to work. So it goes, the next day I discovered that one of my young waitresses had quit because of my outburst. That rocked me to the core because I knew I could be better. I needed to get a grip and I had to make amends. So I immediately called her on the phone, saying, "I'm terribly sorry," I said. "I had no right to speak the way I did, to lash out like that." Then her father, who had been listening to our conversation, surprised me when he interrupted. He said, "Listen, Tony," he said in a voice edged with a firm resolve, "we can accept your apology and understand how something like that can happen in the heat of the moment. But I don't think I want my young daughter working there any longer." This was a wake-up call about my behavior that rocked me to the core. Number one, like a bolt from the blue, I realized I wasn't the most important person in the operation, not by a long shot. The honor belonged to the frontline staff. They were the ones who made everything happen. That to me was just super stuff to learn. You learn that you're not the most important person. And when I take people on orientation of the property, telling them about the company, some of the mistakes I've made, I always emphasize to them that in my orientation that I'm not the most important person. They are, because they're the front line. They make the difference. And that to me was a great learning lesson.
That made the hotel properties, the resort better, that made you better, that made your team better. And that's, what it's all about.
You don't learn those things sometimes in school. You learn them, in the front lines.
Your book is filled with colorful characters, and one of the most memorable is Aldo. Can you share a little bit about Aldo?
First of all, I want to thank my, he wasn't a ghostwriter because we became friends and I met him, Bill Schreiber. We did these audios. I would send him 10, 15-minute audio and he helped me organize. And when I got to the story about Aldo, I sent him the audio. He came back, he said, "We're going to need a full chapter on this one." So, which I thought was classic. But it was a great time in the end. Things were very loose and casual. And I think Aldo was sort of probably a trust fund baby from in South America or whatever, had money and was just free and loose and came to the inn and kind of got himself into a little bit of a bind. And that for whatever reason, the movie from American Graffiti flashed in my mind. And that's when I had the idea of chaining his car to the post. And it was just one of those things that happened in a very loose and casual way. I always wanted to go to the Cornell School graduation and tell them that story, but I don't think I will.
It's such a great tale, the way you were able to read who he was and that, you needed to be careful and so that he was going to pay his bill and you made sure that all worked out. But there's way more to it and people can read the book, but go ahead.
Oh, it's one of the highlights of the thing. I'm glad I put it in there. I want to emphasize, too, that nothing in the book is really exaggerated. This is all the way it came about, which is kind of fun,
I was out on Captiva over the weekend and I got to read part of the book out there. And That was really fun. Talk about a sense of place. It was wonderful to have that experience. So thank you very much. What are, I guess, some of the bigger challenges in growth at Tween Waters Inn now?
Now, Tween Waters, we are pretty much built out and in very good shape considering the 3 storms that we went through. But as our company that owned Castaways, Beachview Cottages, and Westwind, which all got wiped out during Ian, we're in the process now of trying to rebuild and work through everything. And so one of our projects right now is coming out of the ground, which is Beachview Cottages. But as I explained to those guests who now come to Tween Waters because Beachview, Castaways, and Westwind aren't there, I told them, I said, you have to understand when we rebuild things, it's never going to be the way it was. It won't be individual cottages. Those properties, whether it was Fort Myers Beach or Sanibel or even some on Captiva, got wiped out. So the challenge for us is it's going to be a new influx of people because to build a building, 22 units, costs us 15 or 16 million. The ADR and has to be much different than it was prior to Ian and where those cottages were because, you got a debt service and those types of things to do. So because we expanded and we were doing very well, of course, until the storm, but, everything changes. And luckily for us, Tween Waters survived, which gave us a cash issue that we could, keep many employees. As a matter of fact, we pulled some of the employees from Westwind and some of our other properties to come and work for us, which was helpful as well.
In your book, you write about the importance of making guests feel heard and valued. And when guests arrive at Tween Waters today, what do you hope that they feel the moment they step foot on that beautiful property on Captiva Island?
And all the years I've seen people, and I think it's the sense of relaxation when they come into the office and are greeted. I like to think it's kind of like the TV sitcom Cheers. It's a place where everybody knows your name. I've got bartenders who've worked for me for 8 or 9 years, and they look forward to seeing those people coming. A front desk agent, has been with me 8 or 9 years. We'll look forward to greeting these return guests and also taking in new guests and making them feel very welcome. I think we like to have service, but we don't want it to be suffocating. I don't like it to be canned. I like it to be natural. One agent, our front desk might be a different personality, and that's okay. I don't want to make them clones. I like to have them be their own individuals and understand, what hospitality is.
You were part of the effort to get Tween added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2011. Old Captiva House, cottages like the one used by cartoonist Jan Ding Darling, and the resort's contribution to Florida's cultural history were key elements in making this designation happen. Looking back over your career, what are you most proud of?
That's pretty cool because the idea that we were able to renew these cottages and make them so much better and to get on the historic register, it's one of those things that I'm very proud of, that we were able to do that and that we could preserve it. I think looking back, when we first purchased this property, we had the architect draw it up like nothing was here. And then we looked at buildings where we could move and manipulate things to save and preserve those things that were meaningful. Now, some of the cottages, or if you want to call them that, where they were in pretty rough shape, we had 8 plexes that you could sit in bed and make coffee at the same time. So when we knocked those down, we built other buildings, but we wanted to preserve that old Florida feel. And I think we've accomplished that in the old Captiva House dining. And even when we built the newer restaurants or redid the Crow's Nest, and which is now the Shipyard, and we built the Crow's Nest, which is now up on top, all those things still fit. And I think that's probably what I'm most proud of. And then I'm proud of the idea that we can have such great longevity in our employment. I've got people who work for me are still working. I got probably over 16 or 17 people who are working for me who've been with me for 20 years or more. So those things make me feel really very good.
Working 20 years in the hospitality industry at one place that's saying something.
And that's a good point you bring up, Jackie. We are kind of different than everybody else in that ownership is present on the property and working, as opposed to many properties of our size or larger or in that area would have a management company running the business. And the shareholders and the board of directors would be not around. And I think we're much different in that respect.
You were talking about Old Florida. What does Old Florida mean to you, Tony?
I think it's a sense of a casualness, where nobody's in a real big hurry. It's a question of a relaxation. I think that's the key. It's not being rushed or in a hurry, just a friendliness too. I'm sure if you go over the East Coast, and nothing against the East Coast, but you walk around there and say hello to people, they might look at you a little differently than they do here on Captiva. And that goes for my fellow companies who work with us, the Sandy Stillwells and Green Flash, these other people. We're all in the same boat, so to speak.
So let's shift to a couple of fun questions. What's your favorite spot on Captiva to watch a sunset? And I think I'm going to know the answer, but I want to hear it from you.
Right in front of Tween Waters to see it every day, just you can sit out in front of the old Captiva house, or if you're up on the Wakefield room at a function to see it. And then a lot of people, too, enjoy the sunrise on the marina side as well.
You've got both.
Yeah, we got both. Yes, we do.
And you have weddings out on the beach also, sunset weddings?
Lots of weddings. Yeah, people love to get married on the beach and then at sunset and then come on in and enjoy, good food and fun.
What is the most unusual or memorable request you've ever gotten from a guest?
One of my longtime guests said, Tony, do you and Angie want to renew your vows with us? We have this person coming up to our cabin. We're going to renew our vows. Do you want to join us? Well, Angie, of course, is a little more reserved and said, no, I don't think so. But I thought that was an unusual request to have your wedding vows and have me join them. But again, he's a guest that's been coming here for 30 years or whatever. And so I thought that was an unusual request, to say the least.
Definitely wanted to get you involved, but it sounds like you took a pass.
Yeah, I did. We took a pass, but he was really a neat guy. Matter of fact, he's the same guy who painted the picture that does the cover of my book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had taken a photo and I wanted to use it. Bill Schreiber said, no, we can't use that. It's not the right setup. I said, I got an idea. So I had this guest who still comes here, and he's a fabulous artist because what he did with the photo and how he did the cover of the book, I thought was sensational.
I'm looking at it right now. It is beautiful. It's tropical. It's what you see when you're driving out of Tween.
Well, if you ever come by, Jackie, and you got time, I'll show you the actual photo that was incredible that was taken from the old Captiva house after a heavy rainstorm. The parking part's flooded, so it looks like a lake, and there's an absolute perfect rainbow going over the whole Gulf of Mexico.
So many of our listeners are thinking about planning a trip to the Fort Myers area and the islands. After everything you've seen and experienced in this area, what would you tell someone who's considering a visit?
If you're here at the inn, you have all kinds of things to do: pickleball, tennis, kayaking, fishing, biking, shopping, whatever. But there's so much else. You have the Ding Darling Refuge, which is very well. You have Crow, Big Arts, Shell Museum, SCCF, to name a few, what you want to do on Sanibel. But then if you want to go into Fort Myers, depending on the time of the year, you have Major League Baseball, and certainly the Edison Home is a must. So there's so much. If you're here for a week, it's not enough time, in my opinion.
So what's next for you and Captiva's hospitality scene?
We're trying to finish that one building that may be open in March the Beachview cottages, which will have an assortment of different kinds of units. One of the units being actually a 4-bedroom unit that will be directly on the Gulf of Mexico with 180-degree views of the beach. It's sensational. I've been up there. I've got a great general manager now, which I think is long-term. You better be, or I'll chain his car up. And I got a new food and beverage manager who's doing very well. So as I look at my job going forward, I'm here to mentor my coworkers in ethics and work-life balance, if they're, for them. And also to teach them a little bit, too, about charitable giving. Our company's always been very good about that, and I like to pass that through and tell these folks. And I'm always humbled by when I only go out once a year and ask for United Way participation. And I'm very humbled by the work and the amount of giving that my employees do. I'm very honored and humbled by it.
The resort truly is a part of the community in all ways. That says a lot about you and the people who work for you out there.
Like I said, it's a joy to come to work every day.
I'd like to thank you once again, Tony Lapi, author and innkeeper at Tween Waters Inn, for being my guest. It was a pleasure hearing such fascinating stories about building this landmark on Captiva Island. And once again, his book, Tales of an Island Innkeeper, is available on Amazon, independent bookstores. Proceeds go to the Captiva Historical Society.
On Sanibel's Macintosh bookstore and on Captiva. We sell them here at the marina. Also, Bailey's Island Store and Captiva Cruises have the books as well.
And if you're around, you might even be able to autograph it.
I've signed a bunch. I'm happy to do it. Anybody wants to bring it up, I'm more than happy to autograph them.
This is Shellcast, the award-winning podcast of Fort Myers, Islands, Beaches, and Neighborhoods. It's produced by the Lee County Visitor and Convention Bureau in Fort Myers, Florida, with special thanks to our producer, Andrew Frame. Thank you very much for listening to Shellcast, the podcast that's a beach break for your ears. You'll find Shellcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And in the words of Tony Lapi, let's see where life leads next. I'm Jackie Parker, and I'll catch you again next time.
Shellcast.